Today we are going to have a look at the top 10 pointless dungeon entrances in World of Warcraft. So let's see which dungeons those are.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Pointless Top 10, a show where we make top 10 lists of pointless things. Why are we flying by this pointless statue in Booty Bay? Because inside pointless things are treasure. Let's begin. 10. Number 10 is the dungeon entrance for the Throne of Tides and the scrapped Abyssal Maw dungeon. And it's pretty cool because, you know, you're swimming around and you look down and you see this big whirlpool in the ground with all this glowing blue energy or whatever it is kind of radiating from it. And you got the cracks in the ground. And it's just like, you know, you see that and your initial thought is like, dude, can I swim into that? At least that was my initial thought. Some people are probably like, oh, I gotta stay away from that. I might get killed in there. But you're just like, dude, what happens if I swim into there, right? So everybody's gotta have that thought, right? But it is really cool, you know, once you swim into it, it's like a big Mario pipe. It like warps you down and you're like, bloop, bloop, bloop. And then you swirl around and you end up in this big beach room. And it's actually pretty sick, you know, some really cool rocks and plants and stuff in there. And you got some waterfalls happening, you know, really cool pillars. They almost look like mushrooms, but I don't think they're mushrooms. They're like coral. What? I guess that would actually make a lot more sense. It's coral, not coral. You know what? Underwater mushrooms are essentially just, you know, coral, right? Scientists out there. Anyway, it's nice to go and give back.
It's actually interesting because I saw a documentary about corals and, yeah, the deep sea. And there are actually such corals that have this kind of mushroom-like appearance in real life too. But they were red. So, yeah, this is a different color. I saw those in red, actually.
Azure some credit, because there is a lot of cool art and a lot of cool stuff in this zone. And, you know, it gets a lot of hate, from myself included, right? Because I've always been like, I hate Azure and all that stuff. But it's got some cool stuff. And that's why I wanted to put this dungeon entrance at number 10. 9. Number 9.
For me, you know what? Why this to me pointless? Because you just go into this swirl thingy and then you are immediately inside the dungeon. That would be actually cooler, I think. Like, it would be nice to have like this one dungeon entrance that's like super different from all the others. Like, usually the dungeon entrances have this sort of same size, right? Kind of, or very similar. And like, imagine having a dungeon entrance that's like super big and so different from all the others. So just swimming through that immediately gets you into a dungeon would be even cooler, in my opinion.
At number 10. 9. Number 9 is the Vault of the Wardens, and if you don't know, the Vault of the Wardens was the max security facility to hold all the great threats to the world, including Illidan Stormrage's body, his demon hunters, and a bunch of other stuff.
That's where you are when you make a demon hunter.
And one of the coolest things about this place is the door. The door has a bunch of runes that light up, and these things start spinning around. It's just really cool, and I'm not going to lie, the door is the main reason I actually put this on the list. I love the way this door opens. And I had to learn more about the door,
why is it pointless?
So the door to the Vault of the Wardens is actually opened by the Darnassian phrase Anu Doranai Tala, which translates to "Let my will be known."
Oh, wow.
Did I say it right? Probably not, but I never say anything right, so... But aside from that, you know, it's this big cave area. It's very gloomy and rainy. And it's kind of just hidden away, which I think is really cool. And there's all these owls everywhere. It's a bunch of owl art. I still don't know why the wardens use owls. I tried to find something about it, and the only thing I found was...
Isn't this like... I think the owls are they not used? I think there was like some lore saying that the owls are used as the eyes of the night elves or something. Have I not heard this somewhere, that the owls are the eyes of the night elves? And there's also like a form for druids where they turn into owls, and they're using this form to scout and stuff, right? So aren't the wardens kind of like the keepers, meaning that they are like, so they have like some sort of guardian role, so they need to be the eyes that protect or something, kind of like that, right? So maybe that's why it's the owl, because they are the eyes of the world to protect it from threat or something, maybe.
Owls everywhere. It's a bunch of owl art. I still don't know why the wardens use owls. I tried to find something about it, and the only thing I found was a note that said wardens use owls, and I was like, well, yeah, obviously, but I don't know. I guess because it's like they're sneaky or stealthy. I don't know. Are owls stealthy? I guess they are. Yo, so I actually looked up some owl facts because I was like, all right, let's see if owls are actually stealthy, and it turns out they are very stealthy.
Yeah.
So it says the nocturnal hunters have feathers that absorb aerodynamic sound and suppress the vibrations that occur when a bird beats its wings. During flight, an owl's feathers extract mechanical energy and convert it into heat, The result is perfect silence as it approaches a mouse, vole, or other prey.
I can give you guys an example, and this is here in Germany in the forest. So it was 3 days ago where I took a walk in the forest and I actually encountered an owl that flew over me. And what was like super interesting was the place where I was standing for a bit, and I was just like looking around. I was looking at freaking plants growing, like flowers, and there was like this view to a farm with like a huge grass field and stuff. And I was just chilling there looking around. And then suddenly behind me, just like maybe like 2 minutes later, I was standing there for like 3-4 minutes or so. And like 2 minutes after I was standing there and looking around, suddenly a owl flew over me from behind. And I was like, what the heck? Wait a second. I was there for like two plus minutes, and I didn't even notice like that the owl was behind me. Like it was on a tree behind me, like literally. I just suddenly heard all of a sudden like some very quiet noises of some wings flapping. Like, what is this? Turn around. Oh, that's a freaking owl. And it just flies over me. It was so cool. And that thing was actually huge. Like this owl, I'm not sure which species it was, but it was probably like this size at least. Maybe, yeah, like that.
Yo, that shit's crazy. What?
I think those are fascinating
Anyway,
creatures.
that's number 9. 8. And number 8 is the Waycrest Manor dungeon entrance. And I think this place does a really good job kind of encapsulating the feeling of what you're going to experience when you go into this dungeon. You know what I mean? Like, when you walk here, you go, oh man, we're going into this crazy, evil, haunted house, right? Like, that's the vibe you get. And I think it does a really good job doing that.
Nice.
And that's what a dungeon entrance should do, right? It should set up the dungeon. And so when you get here, you've got the gate, which is all like, you know, these scrolls and the lanternfish and these like hanging
reminds you of some movie,
I
right?
don't know, like magical things. And then you got the demon energy shooting out of the ground or whatever it is. And you got the barren trees with the, you know, kind of branching out. You would imagine a haunt.
Wasn't this Caspar the Ghost or something? Where there's also something like this. Reminds me of some sort of Disney movie with like some haunted mansion or something, right? Like I get like Disney horror movie sort of, not horror movie, but like Caspar the Ghost or something vibes from this.
With the, you know, kind of branching out, you would imagine a haunted house would have.
Yeah.
And you got the pathway leading all the way up to the house and the door. It's
So
just, it's a
Disney-like.
really cool vibe. And I think it does what it's supposed to do really well. You know, to me, it's not even about if the dungeon is good or not, because I'm sure some people will be like, you pick this one, it's not even a good dungeon, which I think Waycrest Manor was okay, but still, it's more about the setup, you know? It's like,
Those things are creepy.
is this dungeon entrance setting up the dungeon in a way that kind of makes me want to go in there, right? Does it make me go, ooh, you know, I want to step foot in that place
It was like
and see
a
what
place
this is
for
all
questing.
about? And I think it does that pretty well.
Really?
And so that's why it's number 8. 7. Number 7 is the Maradon entrance, and I picked this one because it's one of those dungeon entrances where
That's
I never
actually
really
so
paid
cool.
attention to it or really acknowledged it that much. I'd always just run up to the door and click it and run in.
I actually love those kind of dungeons where there's like some giant statue, and that statue has some sort of door or path that leads somewhere. Because it's very, very visible for once when you're like flying around with your mount, right? And second, it looks like some sort of ancient kind of temple-like dungeon, right? And that is usually so freaking cool.
Where I never really paid attention to it or really acknowledged it that much. I'd always just run up to the door and click it and run in. And now kind of taking a
what
step
race is
back
this,
and
by the
looking
way?
at it,
I
I'm like,
can't
what
even
is
tell.
that thing? Like, why is this the Maradon entrance? You know what I mean? Like, I
What
figured
is
it'd be a big
this?
centaur or something with all the centaur
Does look
around
like
here.
a centaur.
And from looking it up, it appears it's an old troll god. And
Looks
that's all I
slightly
can
like an
find about it.
elemental,
There's
right?
like no, there's like nothing else. So if anybody knows,
stone
comment in the
elemental.
comment section down below, because somebody said, oh, it's in the quest lore, but I couldn't find like any quest lore. So I'm like, I have no idea. But apparently it is an old troll god. And you click the door and you go
Does
into
that
this
look
big
like a
cave
troll?
system, and it's got a bunch of crystals and water and kind of cool statues and artifacts in there. It's actually a pretty awesome kind of dungeon entrance area that really builds up the lore. And I'm not gonna lie, back in the day, I didn't really care about any of this. I was just like, let me get through. But now, kind of
Lore
looking
was
back
so
on it,
good,
I'm like,
actually,
yo,
back
this
in
is
the day.
actually pretty cool. You know what I mean? And so I was learning.
I love the like old lore of WoW because it was more simple And it was like interesting because it was about like loas, for example. We had like lots of dungeons with like loas, with like jungle trolls, with the centaurs, like the origin of the centaurs. And I hope that Blizzard from now on stays more simple with the lore. Like sometime around BFA, I feel like they really started making the lore very, very complex. The Shadowlands even worse, and now Dragonfly is like, it's simpler now. But I hope they stay more simple with the lore, that people can actually grasp the information and lore that they are trying to deliver in the game, right? Like I don't want to rely on freaking reading novels to understand what's happening in a game. Like if a game is where I have to like buy stuff like books and read through them to understand why I'm doing something inside a game, then the information, the lore is not delivered correctly through the game, and this is like very, very bad in my opinion. So Blizzard needs to be careful to not make the lore too complex. Like make it simple and interesting.
This is actually pretty cool. You know what I mean? And so I was looking up more lore. And it says, following the Horde's rise to power, Theradros worried that her centaur children might be driven to extinction. She infused them with her power and drove them to claim new territories outside of Desolace. Horde adventurers traveled to Desolace and learned from the Magrum clan, the only clan not loyal to Theradros, that the Maraudon was the source of the corruption in the region. The Horde's champions helped the Magrum suppress the other clans in Desolace before traveling into the depths of the burial ground and defeating every creature inside of it, including Theradros. This ended the spreading corruption in the region and eased the Centaur's violent bloodlust. This also freed Zaytar's captive spirit, but he chose to remain in Maraudon. Pretty cool lore. I always just was like, oh man, this dungeon's long and boring, and it's in the place where we have to grind Centaur rep. You know what I mean? But then when you actually don't care about doing any of that, and you can sit back and look at it from a different viewpoint, you're like, yo, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's what this series is all about.
Backstory.
And that's why this is number 7. 6. And number 6 is the Wailing Caverns dungeon entrance. And I had to put this on the list. One of the reasons is because whenever I think of the Wailing Caverns, I think of the dungeon entrance more than I think of the actual dungeon. And this really is one of those places with that.
Sort of face?
I mean, it's just really cool. There's this big skull, like animal-like skull. I don't know if it's like a snake or a something. I don't know what it is, but I remember back in...
I don't think this is an animal. It doesn't look like an animal face, right? It looks very humanoid in my opinion. I don't know what species it is, but it's like a very humanoid species. I don't think this is a beast species.
In classic WoW, you had to go up into the eyeball, and that's where you could get some like leatherworking pattern and some other stuff, and there's quests there, but that was pretty cool. Because you had to like walk around and fall down and go in there.
Like those all
and then you would go in and there's
rework.
like all these little quests you could do. There's like some stealthy goblin guy, and you had to kill raptors and stuff. And then it was just a big cavern, right? And then much like all the other things I mentioned, where it builds up the ambience for the actual dungeon, it really did that well. Like you do all these things, and then you go into the actual Wailing Cavern, and you're like, "Woo, this is cool." And then you spend 10 years in there, and you come out, and you're like, "I never want to go in there again." I thought about doing some lore for the Wailing Caverns, but like, dude, this episode is gonna be like 30 minutes long if we do that. You know what? I'll give you a little synopsis. So there's Gnarlex. He goes into the caverns. He's like, this place is pretty cool. I need to meditate here, connect to the Emerald Dream. He tries to do it, but he connects to the Emerald Nightmare instead. And then all his friends go crazy. All the wildlife and the waters go insane and become corrupted. And then you have to fight them all. That's pretty much it. Which is still pretty cool. I always wondered why we had to fight the Druids of the Fang or whatever. I'm like, how'd they get here? That's like the substitute teacher version of the Wailing Caverns history. It's like you're back in class. Ricky, put that down. All right, your parents might let you do that at home, but you're not doing it in my classroom. All right. 5.
Wow.
Number 5 is the Storm Stout Brewery entrance, and I picked this one because I always see this building when I fly over the Valley of the Four Winds, and it's like impossible to miss, right? It feels like one of the biggest landmarks there. And it in itself is a dungeon entrance, right? Like this building is all a dungeon entrance into the actual brewery. And when you go,
you know, it's like funny. So this is the dungeon entrance, right? Somewhere there. But this, what you see here, is actually part of the dungeon. So you actually, when you enter the dungeon, walking through this part as well here.
A dungeon entrance into the actual brewery. And when you go into the dungeon, it has some of the best lore. Like we just talked about old gods and druids and the Emerald Dream and the Nightmare and all this stuff. And then this is just like, hey, Vermin and Hosen have overrun the brewery and they're destroying the beer and we gotta save it. So can you like go save it? And you're like, yeah, I guess. And so that's pretty much it. But the Stormstown Brewery has all those things I was talking about previously, right? Where it's like you walk up to the dungeon entrance and it feels like you're already a part of the dungeon by being there. You know what I mean? It has all the barrels and it has the hops.
It has nice decorations.
And it has all these pandas kind of working and trying to, make beer and can't wait to go drink it later. And, you feel like, you know what? I got to help these pandas get drunk. You know what I mean? Because if I don't do it, their beer is ruined. And so this unbelievable lore paired up with this big landmark building and a lot of really cool aesthetics like the water mill and all that stuff make me put this at number 5. 4. Number 4 is the Dead Mines dungeon entrance. And I think a lot of people probably put Dead Mines at number 1 on their dungeon entrance because I'm sure there's a lot of nostalgia involved. And, back in the day, this might have been the first dungeon you ever did, I played Horde, so I don't have as much nostalgia with it, but I do have a pretty big appreciation for it because I think it does a really good job of setting up the dungeon, right? You just walk into this town and you are like, oh, it's just some town, right? But then you go into a building and you're like, oh, okay, so this leads somewhere, and it's almost like a secret passage, you know what I mean? And then
this is actually so big, like when Classic came out and stuff, like a lot of people were going there. It was insane. I always saw like trains of people doing freaking Dead Mines and stuff. And like zone chat was spammed.
And before you know it, you're going down into these tunnels and into more tunnels. And then it goes down into these caves. And then there's like, oh, the actual dungeon entrance. Then you keep going down, right? And it really is the Dead Mines, right? You keep going deeper and deeper.
Maybe also Nomerigan.
I think it does a really good job setting that up. And it all starts from wandering into some building. Like back in the day, you have to think about that. Like now we see the building, we're like, oh, it's the Dead Mines town entrance, right? But back then, you didn't know anything, you're just some random new player to World of Warcraft, and you're like...
Yeah, and then you just follow the other players, like, or you ask them, where are you going? What's happening? What's this kind of stone standing there? Why is there a stone next to a building with some symbol on it or something? I think that's like how some people realize that, when they just read freaking zone chat or so. But I think if you're an Alliance player and you're like a super old school player, like the most nostalgic ones are Dead Mines together with probably Nomerigan. Because Nomerigan is also very, very epic and it's very nostalgic. I actually wonder if he also puts it on this list.
Oh, it's the Dead Mines town entrance, right? But back then, you didn't know anything. You're just some random new player to World of Warcraft. And you're like, oh, here's a town. And you just stumble in here and you're like, dude, what is this? Where am I going? And before you know it, you're like, this is crazy, And it creates that big sense of adventure.
Oh.
And it makes you want to go to the Dead Mines. Because you're like, dude, I stumbled across this building and I wandered down here. And now there's this dungeon entrance and like, I gotta go here. You know what I mean? And luckily enough, if you're a lower level, you can still go there pretty quickly. So it's not even like you have to wait till level 40 or 50 or something, right? And I think that's really cool. And
it's like one of your first dungeons you do in WoW.
I wanted to put it higher up on the list because I think it really is one of the first ever dungeon entrances that people really ran into that made them want to go into a dungeon. Yeah. And that's why it's number 4. 3. Number 3 is the Temple of Zul'farrak dungeon entrance, and this was actually going to be on the Pointless Top 10 Statues list, which I'll put in the cards.
I almost forgot about this one, actually.
But I was like, you know what? This would actually probably be better as a dungeon entrance. And I was like, why don't I just do dungeon entrances? And that's really what sparked this entire video. So I love this thing. It is a giant snake that keeps getting hit by lightning or electrified, whatever. I don't know what's happening, but it just looks really cool, especially at nighttime or the evening or dusk, when all the little blue glowy lights are lit up, and then it's just like, and everything just gets zapped.
Was this how you grind reputation fast by doing this as well, right?
It's really the landmark of the entire zone of Vol'dun. And fun little fact here, the snake symbol in the Temple of Zul'farrak and the Ouroboros sash are inspired by the real-life Ouroboros symbol depicting a snake or dragon eating its own tail as a representation of the cycle of life and death. So there you go. But overall, I just like the fact that it's a really big snake that keeps getting zapped by lightning. I think it's sick, and that's why it's number 3. 2. Number 2 are the Caverns of Time dungeon entrances, and there's a lot of dungeon entrances in the Caverns of Time, but I really like what they do because it ties into what I've been talking about this entire video, right? Where it kind of gives you a glimpse of what you're about to experience when you go into the dungeon.
Yeah, they have always something like fitting to that dungeon, like near to the entrance. Like you see some runes, sometimes NPCs that fit in. what I like so much also about the Caverns of Time is how like you freaking enter this sort of cave and then you're like in space and stuff. Like it always freaked me out. Like I was there, I look like up to the top, like what the heck, I'm in freaking space or something. It looks really magical in there, and I kind of love this, how there's like some sort of sand here like outside, but there's still like trees growing and stuff, and so many destroyed buildings and all that. Kind of like this all got sucked into it, right?
What they do, because it ties into what I've been talking about this entire video, right? Where it kind of gives you a glimpse of what you're about to experience when you go into the dungeon. I wonder how they grow without sunlight. It has to, because otherwise you're like, which dungeon is which, right? Unless you look at the map, which you can. But it's much more interactive and fun if you see it for yourself by walking up to it and being like, oh, I guess this is this place because it has things from that dungeon on the outside of it, right? And apparently all the things that are here are this is according to Wowpedia again. The caverns are littered with artifacts and buildings such as statues, weapons, the half-buried bones of a gargantuan beast, a guard tower from Lordaeron, a dwarven domed building, a temple from Stormwind, dour orcish chieftain quarters, a stranded ship, armor from the reign of the first king of Stormguard, and the statue of an elven cleric.
Even a graveyard.
Apparently, Nosdormu spent years gathering and cataloging this mismatched collection of antiques. Which, when you hear that, you're like, oh, Nosdormu was collecting stuff. But in my mind, I pictured Nosdormu going into like an antique shop, being like, ooh, this would fit very well in my cavern. But overall, I put this at number 2 because not only is it numerous dungeons that are kind of tied into this one area, but I always just really enjoyed the zone. Well, it's not even a zone, but I enjoyed this area. It just always made me feel like almost like a homey feel, like a very comforting feel. And I don't know why, because it's not like a comforting place, but I've always just really enjoyed being in the Caverns of Time. Even when they did the big WoW anniversary thing, I always enjoyed coming here. And so I put it higher on the list for that reason, but I think it belongs up here, and that's why it's number 2. And number 1 is zul'farrak. I don't know if anybody saw that coming, but zul'farrak always just stood out to me
or something
as my favorite dungeon entrance. And I can always remember going back to my Billy character, my hunter back in the day, and I remember stumbling across zul'farrak and just seeing the entrance to it and being like, yo,
whoa, some runes.
This place is crazy, right? And it just right away, it tells you like, this is a dungeon, right? But being able to see behind it, being able to see like, oh, that's how the dungeon starts, and literally going into the door and seeing like, oh, wow, this is...
It's like weird. Like I find those kind of entrances actually weird, where there's like some sort of invisible entrance. So you basically just walk through and then you're in the dungeon. And you can see through sort of like how it looks like. But you can't fly over it or something. You need to go through the door to enter there and be in this dungeon. And if I'm not mistaken, lore-wise, wasn't zul'farrak and like the area of the desert shores of the... I think it was green before, right? All was green and it somehow dried up or something.
Find it. Being able to see like, oh, that's how the dungeon starts. And literally going into the door and seeing like, oh, wow, this is the dungeon, right? The merger of the two worlds, I think, was kind of mind-blowing to me. And that felt like... I think that was the first time it actually happened, because now there are some dungeons like that, but this was the first one that I feel like it actually did happen with back in classic WoW. Because I know now you can like fly over Zul'Farrak and like there's some other ones, but I always loved that. A little Zul'farrak history for you. Tanaris used to be a jungle and territory of the Gurubashi Empire, and Zul'farrak was a city there. When the Great Sundering shattered the ancient landmass, the area swiftly became the desert of Tanaris. The Faraki tribe of trolls were stranded here and eventually adapted to their harsh new environment, becoming sand trolls.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's really nothing else to it. I always really enjoyed the Zul'farrak entrance. It's one of the most notable in my mind. It's the one that always comes to my mind when I'm thinking of dungeon entrances, and I still love the dungeon to this day. I did it in Classic WoW, I did it in Vanilla WoW, I've done it so much, and I still love it. And that's why
it gives you Tomb Raider vibes or Indiana Jones vibes.
Thanks for watching this episode of Pointless Top 10. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube lingo. Also, if you want to see more Pointless Top 10s, I'll put some on the screen. I'll also put a video I made where I tried to run a hardcore level 1 WoW character across Azeroth. That was pretty dumb, so check that out. Okay?
Oh wow, that was interesting. But yo, Nomeregan should have been also on the list, I think. But yeah, zul'farrak is interesting. And I love the sand trolls. I sometimes wish they became officially an allied race. But instead we got for like dark spear trolls, for the regular ones, the yellow skin, right? So you kind of like could roleplay as a sand troll if you pick that skin on your troll. But yo, some are very, very interesting. And about the Caverns of Time, I also feel really comfortable there because I know there's also so much lore. There's like also the Purge of Stratholme. You have this with Mount Hijal, or Hijal, I hope I pronounced that correct. And like you have so many interesting dungeons, and how you also go to the past and where Arthur's was not the Lich King and all that. Like there's just so much nostalgia, and you will think about Warcraft 3 immediately and all that. Plus, I think it's kind of cool how like certain things were kind of like pulled in, or let's say collected by Nosdormu, right? And you always have this kind of culture there in this corner, this kind of culture there. It's like walking through a museum that is partially in space or something, kind of like that. Like that's the vibes I get when I pass through there. Yo. And I don't know, there are like some dungeons here also that I wish would get a rework. Like more better textures, perhaps like some new plot or something, or like a part 2 of certain plots. That would be so cool. I hope we ever get some sort of World of Warcraft Reborn. Like kind of like a Cataclysm 2. But not a Cataclysm, but some other event, of course. And yeah, some old dungeons get like updated to modern standards. That would be so cool. And you could still do like time walking, go back to the OG version, but there's like a modern version now. So you have like both. That would be a right direction for Blizzard to take. But yeah, if you guys are new to this channel, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more content. And which of those dungeons shown here is your favorite one? Let me know in the comment section. And if you guys enjoyed this one, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And I will see you guys next time.